Okay, welcome back to our class on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So let's start with some meditation in which we will practice some of the things we have already learned about mindfulness, in particular mindfulness of the body, which has a number of different parts. So we'll start with the breath and then spend a bit of time on the parts of the body and the elements of the body. So get into a comfortable position for meditation. Remember the positive altruistic motivation you generated earlier at the start of the previous meditation session. So refresh that motivation for this meditation and this class that we're doing. So really try to have an altruistic intention, wishing to learn something that will help you to be more beneficial for others and for the world. Now, focus your attention, your awareness on your breathing. Remember to just allow the breath to be natural. Do not try to control the breathing, or interfere with the breathing in any way. Allow your body to breathe as it naturally does. Sometimes the breath may be a bit longer, sometimes a bit shorter. And that's fine, that's normal. Allow that to happen. And just with your attention, your awareness, be aware of the breath as it's coming in and as it's going out. So mindfulness is the mental factor that remembers the breath, doesn't forget it and wander away. But sometimes we do lose our mindfulness. We forget our meditation object, like the breath, and the mind does wander away. So introspective awareness or vigilance is the mental factor that notices if our mind has wandered away from the breath and understands that, oh, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to watch the breath. And so it brings the mind back to the breath. It re-energizes our mindfulness, our memory of the breath. So try to have those two mental factors, mindfulness and vigilance or introspective awareness, to keep your mind on the breath as much as you can and bring your mind back to the breath when it does wander away. And as you are aware of the breathing flowing in and flowing out, have the awareness of impermanence. It's easy to see with the breath. It's constantly changing from one breath to the next, and even within one breath. This constant change is taking place in the whole process of breathing. So just try to have awareness of that. Now, let's spend a bit of time looking at one of the other aspects of mindfulness of the body. We looked at the practice of meditating on the parts of the body. So choose one part of your body that you would like to contemplate. It could be the skin, or hair, or nails, or teeth, or maybe some internal part of the body, an organ, or your blood. And just spend some time contemplating that. Try to have a mental picture of that part of your body, what it looks like, what it's made of. And then contemplate how, although that part of the body does have its purpose, its function in keeping your body alive and healthy, enabling you to go on living, but on the other hand, it can have its downside. There can be illnesses, other kinds of problems that occur with that part of the body, maybe even pain. And then the very fact that it's impermanent, it's subject to change. It is changing as time goes on. It's getting older and older, more worn down, more degenerate, more susceptible to illness or other problems. So just try to see both the good and the bad aspects of that part of your body. And so now, see if you can understand that although having a human body is considered fortunate, even precious, because with it we have the opportunity to do a lot of good. We can help others, we can create virtue, good karma, we can follow a spiritual path. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be attached to our body, exaggerating its attractiveness, seeing it as wonderful and perfect and pure and beautiful. Those kind of attitudes are unrealistic because our body is impermanent, subject to change, and the basis for experiencing a lot of suffering, physical discomfort, and pain and sickness. And eventually this body will pass away. It won't last forever. So being attached to our body and identifying with our body as me, I, who I am, isn't wise. Let's see if you can recognize that and have a determination to have more realistic views of your body. So that was kind of a review of some of the practices we've been looking at in relation to the body, mindfulness of the body. And we also looked at the practice of the elements, contemplating how the body is composed of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and wind, and that the external world, things outside of ourselves, all the physical things in the world outside of ourselves, are also composed of these elements. And there's not a huge difference between the elements of our body and the elements out there. And so that can help us to also reduce a strong sense of I and ownership of our body and the parts of our body and so on. And I would like to read something I came across in Joseph Goldstein's book, which is called Mindfulness, a Practical Guide to Awakening. So this is in relation to the contemplation of the elements. The contemplation of the elements is also a powerful remedy for the deeply conditioned pattern of conceit. Conceit, in its Buddhist usage, refers to the deeply rooted sense of I am, I was, I will be. This is one of the last defilements to be uprooted and one of the final veils of ignorance that needs to be removed before full awakening. Notice how often this sense of I am arises in relation to our bodies, particularly when we are comparing our bodies in one way or another to other people's. Notice then how many different thoughts and emotional patterns get triggered through these comparisons, how many projections we get lost in. For example, when we see advertisements, that's particularly powerful. They always use very attractive bodies, young and attractive and seemingly perfect, but apparently a lot of that is Photoshop. So we have thoughts like, if we buy this product, we will be like or look like the perfectly beautiful beings advertising it. Because the comparison is such an obvious ruse, I think what he means is that this is such like a trap, a trick that advertisers play on us, having this exquisitely beautiful man or woman advertising a piece of jewelry or a certain kind of perfume or makeup or whatever. So the message is, if you buy this product, you will look like that. So it's like kind of a really obvious trick. The fact that it often conditions our behavior points to its appeal to some deeply rooted pattern in our psyche. So these advertisements do work. People do want to go and buy that product using the attractive body. So it does show that there's a really deep sense of identification with our body. I think that's what he's saying. In seeing the body as a collection of parts, none of which by themselves are particularly alluring, and then experiencing the body simply as an interplay of elements, the conceit of I am falls away. Feelings of either pride or unworthiness with regard to the body no longer make sense. So that's one of the benefits we can experience if we do this practice, although we might have to do it quite a bit before that happens. And then he goes on to talk about relative and ultimate truth. So the absence of a self, like we say in Madhyamika philosophy, there's no inherently existing, independently existing self or I or me anywhere within our aggregates. And that's the ultimate nature of our self, our I, which is the aggregates, which are the basis of imputation, and then I is labeled on top of that. So that's the ultimate nature, the ultimate reality of our self in relation to our body and mind. But then that doesn't mean we don't exist at all. So we need to keep that in mind, that relatively, conventionally, we do exist. There is an I that is just labeled or imputed onto these aggregates, and that I does exist. It's the I that works and eats and sleeps and meditates, studies, learns, helps people. And then in the Buddhist path, it's the I, that's the I that practices and develops oneself and eventually becomes enlightened. So that we don't want to forget that. We don't want to ignore that. And so he talks about that, and I'll just read the conclusion. He says, a mature spiritual practice sees the union of the relative and ultimate levels, with each informing and expressing the other. The development of what are called the four divine abodes, what we call the four immeasurable thoughts, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, are all based on the conceptual level of beings, or the relative conventional level of beings, wishing all beings to be happy, to be free of suffering, and so on. Yeah, so we don't want to forget that, because other beings exist conventionally, and we need to cultivate these positive qualities towards them. So we don't get too absorbed in selflessness and lose touch with the fact that sentient beings need our love and compassion. At the same time, the deeper our understanding of selflessness, the freer and more spontaneous are these beautiful mind states. On the relative level, love and compassion are states we cultivate. On the ultimate level, they are the responsive nature of the mind itself. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, really wonderful Lama, taught that when we recognize the empty nature of phenomena, the energy to bring about the good of others dawns uncontrived and effortless. So ideally, The more we understand selflessness or emptiness, instead of undermining our love and our compassion, it should actually increase it. If we understand things correctly, we will have more love and more compassion for others rather than less. And then he says, this understanding gives rise to the rare flower of bodhicitta, the awakened heart, which is the motivation that our practice and our lives are not for ourselves alone, but for the welfare and benefit of all. We need to start in a very humble way, simply planting the seed of this aspiration within ourselves, without pretension, without grandiose expectations. Manifesting bodhicitta is a lifetime practice. His Holiness the Dalai Lama acknowledged this even for himself. In one of his books he said, I cannot pretend that I am really able to practice bodhicitta, but it does give me tremendous inspiration. Deep inside me, I realize how valuable and beneficial it is. That is all. So, anyway, that's just a nice little note about making sure that we have a balance between the ultimate nature of things like emptiness, selflessness, and still the conventional relative nature of things, especially in terms of compassion and love and bodhicitta. Okay, so there's one more practice related to the body in your book. It's on the bottom of page 43. It has number 5, mindfulness of the body as a corpse. Now, when we first hear about this or read about this practice, we might feel shocked and maybe repelled, disgusted. We might even have doubt about Buddhism. Is Buddhism really a reasonable tradition? They want me to meditate on the corpse? So one reason or purpose of doing this practice is to really bring home the truth of impermanence and death. Because inevitably there will come a time when this body, which is alive now, will become a corpse. And that's something we usually don't like to think about. We avoid thinking about that. But that itself is good to question. Why do we have such aversion? If you do, maybe some of you don't, but if you do have a feeling of aversion or repulsion to thinking that way, or fear or discomfort, it's good to question that. Why do we feel that way? So it's most probably fear of death and probably a dose of attachment to our body, to our life, to everything we have in our life, not really wanting to accept that it's all going to collapse and end one day. So if there is any sort of discomfort or repulsion about thinking of corpses, then it's good to investigate that. Why do we feel that way? And it's also good to check how we feel when we do see corpses. I have this clear memory of the first time I really got close to a corpse. It was back in the early 80s. I was living in France with some other nuns. We had a little community of nuns in France. And one day we were asked to go and pray for a woman who had just passed away. And we went with our Lama, the resident Lama of the center. So we went together to this house and approached the bed. She was at home. She died at home. And I just felt so scared. And also repulsed, because the corpse really did look quite scary. It really did look like something out of a horror movie. I think she had been suffering from cancer for a long time, so her body had already degenerated even before she died. So her skin was kind of waxy and yellow. Her mouth was open and her teeth were all rotten. Her eyes were also open, And so it really looked like something out of a horror movie. And so I was like, oh, I don't want to get close. But then I wasn't happy with the way I reacted. I thought, this isn't a good way to feel. And so I just said to myself, just a short time ago, she was alive and a human being just like me. Just somebody who wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. And she went through this unfortunate experience of having cancer and dying. I mean, so contemplating in that way and generating some compassion for her and the wish to help her, that really helped me to, clear away those other thoughts and then be able to, we were doing some prayers and mantras for her, and I was able to do it in a more heartfelt way. And then later when I lived in Singapore and I was a resident teacher at a Dharma center there, I was sometimes invited or requested to go and visit people in the hospital who were dying or had already died, and people requested prayers recited for them. So I had more opportunities to be around dying people and also dead people, corpses. And I just got used to it. So I think a lot of it is familiarity. If you're just not used to being around corpses, then you can be quite shocked. But if you do get used to it, then, and especially with the Buddhist thoughts, or any kind of compassionate, altruistic thoughts, understanding, well, these are people, or they were people a short time ago, and they suffered, and now they have passed away, and I would like to do some prayers for them, something beneficial for them, prayers and meditation. So bringing in compassion and love and understanding is a very helpful way of dealing with corpses. And I also think it's quite interesting that we do feel fear of corpses, because when you think about it, a corpse can't hurt us. Yeah? A corpse is unable to move, unable to do anything, so they actually can't do anything harmful to us. It makes more sense to be afraid of live bodies because they can hurt us, they can do harmful things to us. So when you think about it, it doesn't really make sense to be afraid of corpses. But I think it is the fear of death. It's like a reminder in our face that that's going to happen to me one day, and it's going to happen to my loved ones and all the people around me, and I don't want that to happen. So it's more like a rejection of that truth or that reality of impermanence. And as you've probably heard many times before, according to Buddhism, it is really important to come to an acceptance of the fact that we're going to die. Don't avoid it, deny it, suppress it. Instead, accept it. And we have meditations. We're encouraged to do meditation on death. For example, in the Tibetan tradition, there's the 9-point meditation on death that you've probably done already. That's a very, very powerful one, which basically involves contemplating, the inevitability of death. We're definitely going to die. The uncertainty of the time of death. We don't know when it's going to happen. And then looking at what is really going to help us at the time of death, so that we prepare ourselves, we get prepared for death. And I'll just read some sections from Bhante Gunaratana's book called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness in Plain English. So he recommends every day, he says, every day it's good to contemplate death and reflect on it as part of our practice of mindfulness of the body. Contemplating death is inevitably a good way, contemplating that death is inevitable is a good way for us to prepare for a peaceful death and fortunate rebirth. We remember that life is short, that death is certain, and that we cannot predict when this life will end. Doing so encourages us to practice generosity and loving friendliness, strengthens our dedication to our practice, and arouses feelings of spiritual urgency. So that's one reason for this meditation on thinking of our body as a corpse, is to really accept that death is inevitable, and this body is not going to last forever. And it's hard, not easy, but if we do contemplate it slowly, we'll come to accept that. Bhante Gunaratana says that so the kind of meditation explained here, sometimes it's called cemetery contemplation. Actually, I'll read what it says in the book. The Buddha encouraged his disciples to go to charnel grounds to observe corpses in various stages of decomposition. So it seems that in India, at the time of the Buddha, I don't know if it's still now the case, but bodies, when people died, bodies were just wrapped in a cloth and then put in there was a specific place, not really a cemetery, because they weren't buried, but they were just laid on top of the ground. So that's the meaning of the expression charnel ground. And Bhante Gunaratana explains the reason for this. So he said, at the time of the Buddha, people wrapped dead bodies in a white cloth and deposited them unburied in an outdoor area so that animals could eat them. They wanted even their dead bodies to be of some use to living beings. And that was the case in Tibet. In Tibet, they had what was called sky burial. I don't know if the Tibetans use that term, but anyway, that's what it's referred to as. And so when a person died, their body would be taken to a high place usually, and there were certain people who would do this work of cutting the body into pieces, and vultures would come, and I don't know, other animals, maybe wolves or jackals, or mainly vultures, I think, in Tibet. But in India, they probably had, jackals and other kinds of wild animals who are hungry. They're hungry, they need food too. And the body, once our consciousness, our mind leaves our body, then it's just, meat, basically meat and bones. There's nothing, no feeling there. And so if the body can be useful to others, to other beings, then it's like an act of generosity, an act of kindness to other beings. So that's the idea behind that, that people would offer their body after they're gone, after they've died. They would offer their body to other beings to benefit them. And it's not so different from nowadays. Some people offer their bodies to medical colleges, medical schools, because the students in medical schools need bodies that they can study and learn to dissect and look at the different parts of the body. So it's, again, a way of making our body useful to others. And then once those students train to be doctors, then they will be able to benefit many people. Yeah. So if you think about it in that way, it may take a while to think about it, but if you think about it in that way, then it does make sense, and it is a way of benefiting others with one's body. So that was what happened at the time of Buddha. There were these charnel grounds where there were bodies deposited, and then the bodies would be in different stages of decomposition, and also, the animals would come and tear them up, and so one could see what happens to a body after death. And so the Buddha would instruct his monks to go to these places and, they would actually take the shrouds, the cloths from the bodies and use them to make robes. They would collect these rags. But also the Buddha instructed his monks to go there to contemplate the corpses as an object of meditation. But he says, this is only for those who have a good understanding, a full understanding of mindfulness of the body. And also that, a person needs to be quite mature spiritually and emotionally stable. So it's not a practice that people necessarily do at the beginning. But after practicing the other contemplations with regard to the body, mindfulness of the body, especially seeing how it's made up of parts, made up of elements, it's impermanent, it's not me, and so on, then one would be more prepared to do that kind of practice. So nowadays, in our world, we don't have that kind of situation where we can go and see actual bodies in various stages of decomposition. But we could use our imagination, visualize the body in these different stages, and get ideas also from looking at photos of bodies, for example, in natural disasters and so on. Yeah, so we're not going to do this practice, in case you're worried. I'm not going to make you go through this, just in case some of you are not ready for it. I'm just informing you about this practice, just so you know about it. Some of you may feel like trying it on your own. At a certain point, you're welcome to do that, but I'm not going to ask all of you to do it. And at least try to understand the purpose of the practice, the real purpose. It's to be more aware of impermanence and death, and also to decrease attachment to our body. That's the real purpose, is to overcome thinking our body is wonderful and perfect and it's going to last forever. I mean, obviously that's just not the case. And so overcoming attachment is attachment to our body. If we don't overcome attachment to our body, that can lead to suffering and problems later on, when our body does show more signs of aging and degeneration and sickness, and we find ourselves dying. So if we have done these kind of contemplations during our life, when those kind of changes are happening to our bodies as we're getting older, we won't be as shocked and upset as other people are who have never done these meditations. So it will help us to have more ease of mind, peace of mind. So this brings us to the end of the practice of mindfulness of the body, which had a few different parts to it, starting with the breath, mindfulness of the breath, and then mindfulness of different postures of the body, just being aware of what your body is doing, what posture your body is in. And then the parts of the body, Buddha mentioned 32 parts of the body, and then the elements of the body, and then finally the body as a corpse. So there's a lot of different practices involved in mindfulness of the body. And initially we might feel uncomfortable or even repelled by some of these practices. So we don't have to force ourselves to do them all right from the beginning. It's good to at least start with the first few, mindfulness of the breath and so on, and then later you may feel more interested in doing the others. And again, it's important to understand their purpose and benefit. So, and actually it said that if these practices are done correctly, they can lead to states of bliss and insight, liberating insight. So they may seem a little gruesome at first, but if you do them properly, you get beyond that, and you can even get experiences of insight, which are very blissful and liberating from our suffering. And the practice of mindfulness of the body is for the purpose of getting a really deep understanding of the first noble truth, true dukkha, with its 4 attributes, the 4 characteristics that we looked at earlier: impermanence, dukkha, empty, and selfless. Okay, so now we'll move on to the second of the 4 practices of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of feelings. And so in your book, I think this is on the bottom of page 43. So it says, through mindfulness of feelings, we enter into the meditation on the second truth, the true origins of dukkha. The Sanskrit and Pali word is Vedana. I'm not sure how to say it, but that's the word for feelings. We translate in English as feelings. But we need to understand feelings, as used in this context of Buddhism, isn't the same as emotions. But it's the effective quality of experiences. So it said that when we went through the mental factors a few years ago, you might remember feeling is one of the ever-present, omnipresent mental factors, which means that it's present every single moment with every experience we have with our 6 senses. So every time we have an experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, tangible sensations with our body, or with our mental consciousness, like thinking, remembering, dreaming, and so forth. With every one of those experiences, there's always a feeling, the mental factor feeling. And there are 3 types of feelings: pleasurable or happy, painful or unhappy or suffering, and neutral. So every moment we have one of those experiences: pleasure, unpleasant, and neutral. And so the instructions given in the sutra are, when we experience a pleasant feeling, just to understand, I feel a pleasant feeling. When we have an unpleasant feeling, just to understand, I have an unpleasant feeling. When we have a neutral feeling, just to understand, neutral feeling. So initially, we'll probably only be able to recognize the really gross feelings. There's subtler ones we won't be able to recognize. But with time and practice, we can start to notice the more subtle ones. Yeah, let's do a meditation on this, and I was going to read something from Bhante Gunaratana. I'll leave that until next time. But let's just try out to see if we can notice our feelings. So we will use the breath. But I'll just read what Bhante Gunaratana explains. So he says, you can practice mindfulness of feelings within your regular meditation on mindfulness of breathing. So you do mindfulness of breathing, be aware of the breath coming in and going out. And then just try to notice feelings that arise. Notice whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And don't interfere with the feeling. Just watch it. Just watch as it arises and then passes away. You do not need to do anything to control these feelings or make them change. Simply observe them and then return your attention to the breath. So let's try that just for a short time till the end of our session. So again, make yourselves comfortable. Focus your awareness on your breathing. Be aware of your breath as it's coming in and going out. And then have part of your awareness noticing feelings when they arise. You're not making them arise or making them go away, but just as a feeling does arise, a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. As it arises, just notice, observe it, and it will pass. And then when it does pass, return your awareness to your breathing. And you can make a little mental note of pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, or neutral feeling. So just do that, let it go, and then come back to the breathing. So, to conclude our class and our meditation, let's mentally dedicate the positive energy of coming together with a positive motivation, an altruistic motivation, and then spending this time learning more about these wonderful teachings on the practice of mindfulness, which were taught by the Buddha to help us be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. So just doing this is a way to create merit, positive energy. So now let's share that positive energy with others. May it be a cause for all beings, ourselves and others, to find freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering, and eventually, ultimately, attain the state of full enlightenment, Buddhahood, just like the Buddha attained, for the benefit of others, all beings. Okay, so we have a break next week, and you probably have a lot of festivities going on, but it would be good if you can to find a little bit of time each day to continue meditating, and maybe you can choose which of the various meditations that we've learned and maybe do one each day, even if it's just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, just to keep up some continuity. And increase your experience of mindfulness and introspective alertness. So yeah, we just started on feelings. So next time we meet 2 weeks from now, we'll continue with that particular practice of mindfulness. Thank you. Enjoy your holidays.